Peter Schultze-Allen is going to come and tell us about building design with zero waste in mind. You all know Peter. He's been on the Zero Waste Commission for the City of Berkeley. He worked for the City of Emeryville, blah, 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 right? The blue button.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Yeah, thanks. I haven't been here for a few years. Some of you may know me from when I worked for the City of Emeryville, and I was in the waste world. In the last 5 years, I've been doing more of the stormwater thing. So I'm wondering, how many people here work in stormwater in addition to maybe waste? Okay, I see a few people out there. Great. So that's kind of what I'm trying to bring together today is a zero waste and zero litter. It's kind of the stormwater and solid waste or zero waste groups, and talking about designing buildings and operating buildings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this topic is, I'm bringing this to you today, and some efforts that have been going on in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties to reduce litter and reduce waste at the same time. What are some of the main issues and challenges and the best practices, and some resources for you. I have some extra slides if we have time, we'll see. So why zero litter? So as Martin, I think, mentioned earlier, there's the Clean Water Act, and in the Bay Area we have a stormwater permit, a regional permit that a lot of cities and counties have to comply with, and it says basically zero litter to the Bay by 2022. So everybody's already trying to reduce litter. The questions that I wanted to bring up today are, so well, how about building design and operations? How does that come into the issue? So just to make sure everybody knows, in most of the Bay Area, except for most of San Francisco, if you dump something down a storm drain, it goes right out to the bay. Usually there's no kind of treatment or like that for storm drain. That's not the case for a lot of big cities across the country, but in the Bay Area and in most of California, it's just goes straight out to the bay. So like there's this little image here about this fish tank, and this is its lid. So there's no treatment. However, people are starting to install these trash capture devices in the storm drain. So sometimes there might be a way to capture that trash, but a lot of them don't. So in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, which is where I work with our company, we help those jurisdictions comply with the stormwater permit. And there's a couple of these work groups, and they have interesting acronyms for these countywide stormwater programs. In the Santa Clara County, it's SCVRP. And in San Mateo County, it's McWhip. Yeah, interesting. And then they have these kind of other organizations like WMI is the Watershed Management Initiative, and we have a Zero Litter Initiative, the ZLI, in the Santa Clara area, county area, and we have a litter work group in San Mateo County area. So we worked on this in the San Mateo Countywide programs, McWhip. We developed this document a couple years ago. And it focused on multifamily buildings, but a lot of it can apply to any kind of building, usually larger scale building, but commercial buildings. And this is the kind of the first couple pages of it, and I recommend, it's about 60 pages long. So obviously I'm not going to go through it all today, but I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in this topic after my talk today. So what are the issues? And a lot of you are going to be familiar with a lot of these issues. A lot of it's kind of related to the zero waste kind of aspect of it. So you have set-outs, you have overflowing containers, you have storage areas, you have this kind of old compactor, and you'll notice here, what do you see down the middle of the bottom of the page there, or the image there, right? So it looks like there have been repeated stormwater issues, and these kind of flaps that they have on these compactor containers that just cover up this hole is really not a very efficient way of making sure there's no spillage coming out of that container. So this is like a 1900s technology. We really need to, I think, move into the next century on compactor design of containers. You got during collection, you can have issues. And then you have the vehicles themselves. You can imagine if this is a windy day and this giant container is being dumped up at the top of this truck, where is a lot of that material going to go? It's going to be blown all over the place. So what are some other challenges, specifically at multifamily dwellings? You got a lot of different types of multifamily dwellings. So when people say, oh, MFDs are X or MFDs are Y, like, well, it's a lot more complicated than that. You can't just say one blanket statement. There's a lot of different kinds. You have storage areas that maybe take up a parking space like this one here. That can be an issue, is where do you put the containers like on the day of service? Here's out in the street. that container, and you might see in this image there's a storm drain right behind that container in the street where this container is stored on service day. So if there's anything overflowing or blowing out, where is it going to go? It's probably going to go down that storm drain. And collection, you have different types of containers, and as I mentioned before, the different types of trucks, you could have an issue just during collection. Chutes are their own category. How many people here deal with chutes or have experience dealing with chutes? Okay. And also, I wanted to ask, how many people here deal with design review for if you work for an agency or something like that, or if you're an architect or anything like that? Okay, so that's what this presentation is kind of getting at, people who also work in design review. So chutes have a lot of, they're kind of, some people think they're good things, a lot of people think they're not a good thing, we shouldn't have chutes at all, but the reality is buildings, especially larger buildings, a lot of them have chutes. And so this is an image here of an existing garbage chute in a large building. They're often in very tight spaces, and it's a challenge to maintain. I think this particular one, if you wanted to get rid of it, you'd have to take it apart before you could get it out of the room that it's in. Here's an example of a dual chute system on the left there. You get the recycling and the garbage, and here's the access to that roll-up door, and it comes out to the street. So that seems like a pretty good solution for dual separate chutes. Here's an example of what went wrong during construction with a building. They wanted to put in 3 chutes, but unfortunately they didn't design it right, and they couldn't fit in all 3 chutes. They ran out of space after the first 2 went in. So on the left there, it's kind of like during construction, oh, what are we going to do now? We can't fit it in. The reason for that was that they probably didn't allow for enough space between the chutes. They just thought, okay, each chute is 24 inches in diameter, so you need 6 feet of space. You really need like a foot of space between each chute as well. So they probably ran out of space for that reason. Also, they were coming down at an angle. They weren't quite designed right with the wall that was there. So they ended up going with this single chute with a tri-sorter at the bottom. And that has its own set of challenges. In a chute room, sometimes there's a lot of, it's very confined space. This particular high-rise building that had just a garbage chute decided to put in a recycling container in each chute room, and they added an extra set of wheels at the bottom of these recycling containers that are in each chute room, so they could maneuver them really easily in a tight space. Then they bring the containers down in the freight elevator, so there's a lot of logistical issues and time it takes just to go up there and get the containers and bring them down every day. And then they had to figure out how they're going to tip the containers into the recycling containers. So they bought this tipper to dump it in there. So retrofitting an existing building is not easy and can be very time consuming and have a lot of labor cost as well. So what are some of the best practices to deal with litter and zero waste? One of the main tools you can use if it's during design review is to use your conditions of approval for entitlement. And one of the main tools I want to get across to you today is that you want to require a discard management plan, or DMP, sometimes called a waste management plan. And you can also require an operation or an O&M plan for post-construction issues. There are design guidelines you can refer to. There's a lot of different things here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Another one is having a right size, right service program for your hauler, and making sure that they're helping you with that program to make sure that each container is the right size. You have all the different types of containers, the frequency of the service of those containers is correct, and then you'll have less overages and less overfilled containers, which leads to less litter production. So you want to look at your franchise agreement as well and see what it has in it, and there's recommendations for that. So just a couple slides. Here's an example from a great document from the New York City area. You probably can't see this too much, but it's in the document if you want to go look at this toolkit that we developed. That I'll share some references with you on that. This is kind of what an example of one part of a discard management plan would look like. And you probably can't see this very well either, but basically it's an overhead plan view of the site. You've got different locations where the materials are being stored, like trash rooms with recycling. And so this shows an image of the truck. First it would go to this first location. It's on the street. Then it pulls into a parking lot. and it's emptying some other containers in another location, and then it goes to a third location. There's also some single-family homes that were part of this project, and they're bringing their containers out to the street. So you're showing the different locations, what are the different materials, how the truck's going to get there, are the different types of trucks that are going to get there, and all that kind of thing is thought out ahead of time, and you get your hauler to review that discard management plan and approve it before the project is approved. So here's some resources for more information. Some of the SMIC-WIP documents there. The multifamily dwelling litter prevention or reduction toolkit. We have some franchise agreement best practices. There's also the Zero Litter Initiative has their website. Stop Waste also has some great resources, and the New York City design guidelines that I mentioned. There's a bunch of other stuff that you can't read, but you can look at later. Stop Waste, this is their document. This is one from Fremont. This is this Zero Waste Design Guidelines from New York City. That's a really great document I recommend people to look at. So we don't have time for the extra slides, but maybe in questions. Thank you.
All right. Questions? Who's got questions? Somebody raise their. We've got a question back here. Jessica, back a little bit. Or not. Here. There she is. She's got the mic.
Thanks. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, too, for us in our service areas, we're seeing with a lot of the new construction, you get mixed use, right? Several floors of residential and then retail at the bottom.
Right.
With all the new construction, we're going out and we're approving waste enclosures and trash rooms and chutes. And then we're finding that when the tenants move in, there's a disconnect between what the architect had planned and maybe even the property owner. Then they have multiple tenants, and each tenant wants their own service. So something that came up after we met and put all that information together, and something to keep in mind is that, you know, when you approve new construction, telling them that you're assuming service is going to be shared. Otherwise, they need to allot a whole lot more space to do things properly. So.
Yeah,
just
no,
wanted to
that's
add
a good point. Teresa's also been on the litter work group in San Mateo County, so she's had one of the hauler representatives on that litter work group and had a lot of good feedback for us. It is very complicated, especially when you get into mixed-use buildings, and you may have free recycling for tenants, but it costs money for the commercial tenants. So if you share that, how is that going to work? So probably you need to have separate areas for commercial tenants versus residential tenants.
Follow the money.
I just wanted to ask Laura right here in front.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask from the stormwater management side of things what kind of enforcement mechanisms there are, if there's something, penalties and fines that we on our side could be aware of.
Yeah. Well, so each jurisdiction is going to be different on the enforcement, but as these stormwater permit requirements kick in, so by 2022, you're probably going to see jurisdictions getting more serious about this, and they're going to be going out and citing people for maybe overflowing containers. They're going to be working with their haulers more to enforce those aspects of their franchise agreement. I think we're going to need to see more and more of the partnership kind of approach because it is a multifaceted kind of aspect to it. A lot of the city code enforcement programs are right now focused on other things, but we are starting to see some of those code enforcement programs focusing, for example, the city of San Mateo. I think Roxanne, is going to be talking later today, I think, about illegal dumping and the success they've had with their enforcement program. So I do think we're starting to see a shift in the enforcement, and they're taking this more seriously. Banning cigarette butts would be great.
Yeah.
We'll see if that ever happens. But so there's, trying to get, and then the city of Berkeley's ordinance, of course, getting at the reduction aspect of it will be a big part of it too.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Nicely done, sir.